When he told me he was leaving, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't ask him to stay. I just sat there on the edge of our bed, holding the corner of the blanket between my fingers, and nodded like I understood something I never truly did. He said my pain was too heavy, too quiet, too constant. He said he didn't know how to live inside a house where sadness breathed before he did. I remember smiling at him, not because I was strong, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining how grief doesn't knock before entering. Tired of pretending that healing follows a straight line. Tired of apologizing for hurting in ways that made others uncomfortable. Outside, it was raining. The slow kind. The kind that feels like the sky is thinking. He packed his bag carefully, folded his shirts, zipped the side pocket, and when he reached the door, he paused. "I hope you find peace," he said. I wanted to ask him why peace always felt like something people searched for away from me. But instead, I whispered, "I hope you do too." The door closed softly. No slam, no echo, just silence. And that silence stayed longer than he ever did. I used to believe love could carry anything. That if two people held each other tightly enough, pain would eventually grow tired and leave. I learned later that pain doesn't leave. It waits. It settles. And sometimes it changes the shape of love itself. Before everything broke, we were ordinary. We lived in a small house with cream-colored walls that always needed repainting. The kitchen window faced the street, and every morning, light spilled onto the counter like it was looking for a place to rest. I loved mornings. I loved the sound of the kettle, the smell of toast, the quiet hum of a day that hadn't decided what it would bring yet. He used to stand behind me while I made tea, his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "You're always thinking," he would say, and I would smile because it felt good to be seen as someone thoughtful instead of someone broken. Back then, my pain was still private, still soft, still something I believed I could manage on my own. The truth is, my pain didn't begin with him. It came before, years before. It came the day I lost someone I loved more than myself. A loss that didn't scream, it whispered. A loss that didn't tear me open all at once. It took small pieces slowly until one day I realized I was lighter in places that used to feel full. I didn't talk about it much. People don't know what to do with grief that doesn't look dramatic, so I learned to carry it quietly, like a folded letter in my pocket. Always there, never read out loud. When I met him, I thought love might finally give that letter a place to rest. He was kind, gentle, not loud. He listened more than he spoke, and when he laughed, it felt honest. In the beginning, I warned him. I told him I have days where I disappear inside myself. He said, "That's okay, I'll wait." I believed him. We married on a simple afternoon. No big crowd, just family, soft music, and a promise we both meant at the time. I thought pain would shrink once it felt safe. I was wrong. Pain doesn't announce when it's growing. It shows up as silence at dinner, as long pauses for answers, as smiles that take effort. At first, he noticed. "Are you okay?" he would ask. I would say yes, because I didn't want to explain something that didn't have a clear shape. Then he started asking less. Not because he stopped caring, but because caring without knowing how to help can feel like drowning. Some nights, I would sit at the kitchen table long after dinner, the light above me buzzing softly. I wasn't sad exactly. I was empty. He would pass by and say, "You should get some rest." I knew he meant well, but rest doesn't fix what lives in the heart. I started seeing the change in his eyes. The way concern slowly turned into confusion, then frustration, then distance. He missed the woman who laughed easily, who planned trips, who spoke about the future like it was guaranteed. I missed her too. Sometimes I caught him watching me like he was trying to remember who I used to be. That look hurt more than words ever could. One evening, he said quietly, "I feel like I'm losing you." I wanted to say, "I feel like I lost myself long before you met me." But instead, I said, "I'm still here." I was, just not in the way he needed. The house grew quieter. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the careful kind. The kind where both people are afraid to say the wrong thing. We stopped sitting close on the couch, stopped sharing thoughts without thinking first. Pain had moved from being my private guest to an unspoken third presence between us, and he didn't know how to live with it. The hardest part was not the sadness. It was watching him slowly stop asking. Not all at once, not in a way that could be blamed or pointed out, just small changes, like how he no longer waited for me to finish my thoughts, how his answers became shorter, how silence between us stopped feeling shared and started feeling separate. We still lived in the same house, still slept in the same bed, but some nights it felt like we were resting on opposite sides of an invisible wall. I would lie awake listening to his breathing, steady, certain, and I would wonder how someone so close could feel so far away. I never wanted to give him my pain. I wanted to protect him from it. But pain has a way of leaking out, even when you try to seal it carefully. It slipped into my voice, into my eyes, into the pauses where laughter used to live. One morning, I burned the toast. The smoke alarm went off, loud and sudden. I froze. My hands started shaking. My chest felt tight. It reminded me of another moment, another sound, another loss. He rushed into the kitchen and turned off the alarm. "It's okay," he said, a little too fast. "It's just toast." I nodded, but my heart didn't listen. He watched me for a second, then sighed. "You disappear sometimes," he said. "I don't know how to reach you when you do." I wanted to tell him that sometimes I didn't know how to reach myself either. Instead, I whispered, "I'm sorry." That word became my habit. Sorry for being quiet, sorry for being slow, sorry for feeling too much. I never asked if he was okay carrying all of that with me. I assumed love meant you did. Evenings were the hardest. Daylight distracted us, gave us tasks, noise. But night asked questions. We would eat dinner with the television on, even when we weren't watching. It filled the space where conversation used to be. Sometimes he talked about work. I listened. Sometimes he asked how my day was. I said, fine. Not because it was true, but because I didn't know how to explain the truth without sounding broken. One night, he turned off the TV halfway through a show. The sudden quiet made my stomach tighten. "Do you ever think about getting help?" he asked. His voice was gentle, but tired. I stared at the table. "I am handling it," I said. He rubbed his face slowly. "I know you think you are, but it feels like I'm watching you drown quietly." That hurt. Not because he was wrong, but because I knew he was trying. I looked up at him. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he finally said. "I just want you back." I wanted to tell him I wasn't gone. I was just changed. After that night, something shifted. He became careful. Careful with his words, careful with his touch, like he was afraid of breaking something already cracked. He stopped holding me from behind while I cooked, stopped kissing my forehead when he passed by. Not out of cruelty, out of helplessness. And helplessness, I learned, can turn love into something quiet and distant. I started feeling like a burden, like my presence carried a weight that made the room heavier. When I laughed, I wondered if it sounded forced. When I cried alone, I worried he could hear me through the walls. Sometimes I stayed in the bathroom longer than needed, just to give him space to breathe. That's when I realized something painful. I was learning how to disappear politely. There were so many things we didn't say. I didn't say how lonely I felt even when he was right there. He didn't say how exhausted he was from trying to be strong for both of us. We smiled for visitors, answered, "We're fine," when people asked. But at night, the truth sat between us like an unopened letter. One rainy afternoon, he came home early. I was sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. He stood there for a moment, watching me. "Do you remember how we used to talk for hours?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. "I miss that," he continued. "So do I." He sat beside me, but not close. "I feel like I'm losing myself trying to save you," he admitted. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. I reached for his hand. He let me hold it, but his fingers didn't hold back. After that day, guilt became my shadow. I blamed myself for his tired eyes, for his sighs, for the way joy seemed to leave the room when I entered. I started pretending more, smiling when I didn't feel it, agreeing when I wanted to rest. I thought if I could become lighter, he would stay. But pretending takes energy, and I was already tired. Some nights I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to wake him. Other nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if love had a limit. No one talks about that part, the part where love exists, but strength runs out. He started staying later at work, not because he wanted to escape, but because it was easier to function where things made sense. Deadlines, tasks, clear results. At home, everything felt unfinished, unfixable. When he came in late, I would ask, "Long day?" He would nod. Sometimes he kissed my cheek. Sometimes he went straight to the shower, water running between us. I missed him, even before he left. One night while he slept, I sat at the edge of the bed and watched him. His face looked peaceful, free. I wondered if being with me had slowly stolen that peace. That thought hurt more than loneliness, because love should not feel like harm. And yet, here we were, two people who loved each other, standing on opposite sides of pain. That was when I first felt it, the truth I didn't want to accept. He wasn't angry, he wasn't unkind, he was simply running out of strength, and my pain was something he didn't know how to carry anymore. There is a moment in every story where something breaks. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a small sound inside the heart that says, "This is changing, whether you are ready or not." For us, it happened on an ordinary day. No argument, no raised voices, just truth arriving quietly. That morning, the sky was pale and gray, not stormy, not bright, just undecided. He drank his coffee standing up. I noticed that because he used to sit. Small details start to matter when you're afraid of losing someone. "Do you want anything from the store?" he asked, already reaching for his keys. "No," I replied. He nodded and paused by the door. For a second, I thought he might say something else. He didn't. The door closed with the same soft sound it always made. I stayed there long after his car was gone. Something in my chest felt tight, like I was waiting for news I already knew. All day I tried to keep busy. I folded laundry that didn't need folding, cleaned spaces that were already clean. But my thoughts kept circling the same question. How do you know when love is tired? By the time evening came, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from knowing. He arrived later than usual. His shoulders were tense, his eyes distant. "Can we talk?" he asked. Those 3 words felt heavier than any argument we ever had. I nodded. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to laugh over late dinners. The light above us hummed softly. Neither of us spoke right away. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot," he began. I looked at my hands. "I know," I said. He swallowed. "I love you," he said first. That's how I knew something was ending. Love spoken carefully is often preparing to leave. "I love you too," I replied. "But," he continued, his voice low, "I don't know how to stay like this anymore." The word "this" hung between us. It didn't need explanation. "I feel like I'm always afraid of saying the wrong thing, like one small moment might push you deeper into a place I can't follow." I stayed quiet, because I understood. "I wake up tired," he admitted, "and I go to sleep feeling like I failed you again." My chest hurt. "I never asked you to fix me," I whispered. He admitted quickly, "I know. That's the problem. I don't know how to just watch you hurt." He rubbed his temples. "I'm not strong enough for this," he said. That sentence broke something inside me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. He looked up at me then. His eyes were wet. "I feel like I'm disappearing, and I don't think love should cost you yourself." I wanted to scream that I was already gone in pieces, that I didn't choose this pain, but my voice stayed calm. "So what are you saying?" I asked. He hesitated. "I think I need to leave." The words landed softly, but they stayed. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to beg. "I don't want to hurt you," he said quickly. "I just don't know how to stay without breaking." I looked around the kitchen, at the marks on the wall, the chair he always used. "This house already knows my pain," I said quietly. "I didn't want it to hurt you too." He reached for my hand. I let him, but something had already shifted. He packed slowly, carefully, like someone afraid of disturbing something sacred. I sat on the bed and watched. Every folded shirt felt like a goodbye. "This isn't your fault," he said more than once. I didn't answer, not because I blamed myself, but because fault didn't matter anymore. Loss doesn't ask who caused it. When his bag was ready, he stood there, waiting. "I wish I could carry this with you," he said. I smiled sadly. "Some pain can't be shared," I replied. He nodded. That was the last thing we truly agreed on. At the door, he stopped. "I hope you find peace," he said again. The same words as before. I wondered if people said that because they didn't know what else to offer. "I hope you forgive me," I whispered. Not because I was healed, but because holding anger felt heavier than letting go. He left. The door closed softly, and this time I let myself cry. The house felt larger after he was gone, not emptier, just louder in its silence. I walked from room to room, touching things. A mug, a pillow, the edge of the table. Every object held a memory. I sat on the floor and cried until my chest ached, not because he left, but because I finally understood. Love didn't fail. It reached its limit. Days passed, then weeks. I moved through them carefully, like someone learning how to walk again. I stopped pretending I was okay, stopped apologizing for my sadness. Pain still lived with me, but it no longer felt like something I had to hide. I thought about him often, about how he tried, about how he stayed longer than he should have. And I realized something important. He didn't leave because he didn't love me. He left because he couldn't survive my pain, and that didn't make him cruel. It made him human. Sometimes love means staying. Sometimes it means knowing when you cannot. And sometimes the bravest thing is admitting the truth before resentment replaces kindness. After he left, time did something strange. It moved forward, but it didn't feel like it. Days passed, but my heart stayed in the same place for a while, right there in the doorway where he had paused, right there in the silence after the door closed. I learned quickly that grief does not rush. It walks slowly, and it expects you to walk with it. The first mornings alone. The mornings were the hardest at first. I would wake up and forget, just for a second. Then I would reach across the bed and feel the empty space. Cold. Still. The kettle sounded too loud. The kitchen felt unfamiliar. I caught myself setting out 2 cups before remembering. Some days, I laughed softly at my own habit. Other days, I stood there holding a cup that wasn't needed and cried quietly. Not loudly, just enough to release the pressure in my chest. I didn't rush myself. Pain had rushed me enough before. I opened the windows more, let fresh air move through the rooms, not to erase him, but to remind myself that the house was still alive. I moved things slowly. Not everything, just small changes. I placed a chair near the window. I cleared a shelf that held memories too sharp to touch every day. I wasn't erasing love. I was making space for myself. That felt new and strange. One of the hardest habits to break was saying sorry. Sorry for being quiet. Sorry for needing rest. Sorry for feeling sad. No one was there anymore to hear those apologies. So I stopped saying them. At first, it felt uncomfortable, like standing without support. But slowly, it felt like honesty. I let myself sit in silence without guilt. I let myself cry without explaining why. Pain didn't disappear, but it stopped feeling like something I had to defend. People eventually noticed. They asked gentle questions. Some said, "I'm sorry." Others said, "You'll be okay." I smiled. Not because I was, but because I knew they meant well. I learned that not everyone needs the full story. Some things are meant to be held close. I went for walks, slow ones. I noticed things I used to miss. Leaves moving, children laughing, the sound of my own footsteps. Life didn't stop because my marriage ended. It continued, quietly. One evening, I sat with a letter I never sent. I didn't write it to make him return. I wrote it to release what stayed unsaid. I wrote about the love, the effort, the exhaustion. I wrote that I didn't hate him, that I never did. I understood now. He didn't abandon me. He saved himself. And somehow, that understanding softened the pain. Some days were good. Some days felt heavy again. Healing didn't move in a straight path. It looped, paused, returned. I stopped measuring progress. I stopped asking when I would feel normal. Instead, I asked gentler questions. Did I breathe today? Did I eat? Did I rest when I needed to? That was enough. Before, I thought strength meant enduring quietly. Now I knew better. Strength meant honesty. It meant admitting when something hurt. It meant choosing rest over pretending. I wasn't the same person he married, but I wasn't broken either. I was someone learning how to live with pain without letting it define every breath. Forgiveness came quietly, not as a moment, but as a decision I made again and again. I forgave him for leaving. I forgave myself for needing more than he could give. Forgiveness didn't bring him back, and it wasn't meant to. It brought peace instead, a softer kind. One afternoon, months later, I noticed something surprising. I laughed. Not politely, not carefully, but freely. The sound startled me. I realized I hadn't thought about him that morning, not with pain, just with acceptance. Love had changed its shape. It was no longer a wound. It was a memory. I still carry my pain, but I no longer carry it alone. I carry it with understanding, with patience, with a kindness I didn't give myself before. Time did not erase what happened. It folded it gently into my life, like an old letter kept in a drawer, no longer read every day, but never thrown away. I still think of him sometimes, not with longing, not with anger, just with a quiet recognition of what we were and what we could not be. Peace did not arrive suddenly. It did not knock on my door and announce itself. It came in small ways. In mornings where I no longer reached for the empty side of the bed. In evenings where silence felt calm instead of sharp. In moments where my chest no longer tightened at certain memories. I learned that peace is not the absence of pain. It is the ability to sit beside it without fear. I stopped explaining myself to others, to the world, even to my past. I no longer felt the need to justify my sadness or prove my healing. Some days were still heavy. Some days were light. Both were allowed. That freedom felt like growth. Loving him taught me something important. Love does not always fail because it is weak. Sometimes it ends because it is honest. He showed me his limit. I showed him my truth. Neither of us was wrong. We were simply human. I still carry my pain, but I no longer see it as something shameful. It is part of my story, part of my depth, part of the way I understand others more gently now. Pain taught me patience. Pain taught me empathy. Pain taught me how to be softer with myself. If there is one thing I know now, it is this. Not everyone who loves you can walk beside your pain. And that does not make them cruel. It makes them honest. And it does not mean you are too much. It means you are real. Sometimes love stays. Sometimes it leaves. But what truly matters is what remains inside you afterward. For me, what remained was understanding, acceptance, and a quiet strength I didn't know I had. I am still here, still breathing, still learning, and that is enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you are carrying pain too heavy for someone else to hold, please remember this. You are not a burden. You are simply human, and your story is still unfolding.